They say in sports, the loudest statement is often made in total silence. But as you and I watch the fallout of this disaster, that silence doesn't just speak, it burns. It is the heavy, suffocating silence of a patron saint who has been completely abandoned by the very country he once saved. When a man who gave his entire heart and soul to the French jersey is cast aside like a broken tool, the quiet isn't peaceful. It is a chilling, tragic indictment. It is the sound of an empire turning its back on its most loyal guardian when they needed him most, leaving us with a cold, creeping sense of injustice that runs straight down your spine. The final whistle blew at the 2026 World Cup semifinals, cementing a brutal, soul-crushing 0-2 defeat against Spain. As the young French players collapsed onto the turf in utter despair, the television cameras panned across the stadium, searching for a symbol of their heartbreak. But they didn't linger on Kylian Mbappe or the weeping stars. Instead, they captured a single devastating image that will haunt French football forever. It was a 35-year-old man sitting frozen on the bench. His eyes were completely vacant, staring blankly into the glaring stadium lights of North America. It was the face of N'Golo Kante, the patron saint of Les Bleus, utterly forgotten. This was N'Golo Kante, the absolute lung of France, the beloved, tireless champion who conquered the world back in 2018. Yet, throughout this entire World Cup tournament, he was forced to endure the ultimate betrayal. He was frozen out completely. 0 minutes played. Not a single second allowed on the pitch by Didier Deschamps. Anyone else would have raged, screamed, or torn up the dressing room in protest, but not N'Golo. True to his saintly nature, he did not utter a single word of complaint. He just watched. But that quiet, dignified silence, it was absolutely deafening, serving as a brutal, unspoken indictment of a manager who turned his back on a legend. Tonight, we are going to look closely at this tragedy together. We are unpacking the cold, calculated betrayal of soccer's favorite son, a man who deserved to be treated as royalty, but was instead left out in the cold. We are going to examine how Didier Deschamps, in his stubborn pride, managed to break the very heart of French football. It is a story of tactical arrogance over pure, unselfish loyalty. How do you abandon the one player who never asked for anything, yet always gave you everything? Stick with me, because as we dissect this, you will feel the sheer, cold injustice of what was done to N'Golo Kante running straight down your spine. To truly understand the heartbreaking tragedy of N'Golo Kante at this World Cup, you first have to understand the sheer, monumental effort he made just to be standing there in the first place. This was not a veteran looking for a free ride or a comfortable seat on the airplane. No, this was a patron saint preparing for one last holy crusade on the global stage. He knew what his country would face, and he wanted to be ready to sacrifice his body for the team yet again. But the tragedy lies in the contrast between his incredible, selfless devotion and the cold shoulder he received from the one man who should have valued his heart above all else. At 35 years old, most football veterans are looking for a lucrative, easy retirement in a quiet league. But when Didier Deschamps called Kante's name for the 2026 roster, the entire football world rejoiced, believing the guardian angel of France was back. Kante did not view this as some symbolic gesture or a sentimental farewell. To prepare himself, he packed his bags and moved to Fenerbahce in Turkey, where he literally ran his body into the ground. He played nearly every single minute of a grueling season, pushing his limits to guarantee he was in absolute peak physical condition to serve his country one last time. He arrived in North America with a burning desire to serve, not to act as a mere mascot or a token piece of nostalgia on the bench. He was there to be the invisible shield, the quiet mentor, and the unshakable veteran anchor that this raw, incredibly young French squad desperately needed when the pressure reached a boiling point. In a locker room filled with massive egos and young stars, Kante was the pure, stabilizing presence. He was the one who could steady the ship, calm the nerves, and offer his limitless stamina to protect the defense. He was ready to bleed for France, expecting nothing in return but the chance to help them win. But instead of a hero's welcome, our patron saint found himself cast aside into the coldest, darkest corner of the locker room. Didier Deschamps systematically relegated him, pushing him down to the fourth and eventually the fifth option in the midfield rotation. The ultimate, humiliating blow came during the quarterfinals against Morocco. When 18-year-old Warren Zaire-Emery was subbed onto the pitch in the 75th minute, the writing on the wall became painfully clear. Kante was officially iced out of the team. It was a cold, calculated decision by a manager who had decided that the veteran's legendary loyalty was no longer worth a second of his time. The true, agonizing pain of a champion is not just sitting on the sidelines while your teammates celebrate a victory. No, the real torture, the kind that makes your blood run cold, is the absolute, suffocating helplessness of watching your empire crumble to pieces while your hands are tied behind your back. Imagine being N'Golo Kante, knowing exactly how to stop the bleeding, knowing you have the stamina and the tactical genius to save your brothers on the pitch, but being forced to watch them fail because of one man's pride. It is a slow, agonizing betrayal that leaves a bitter taste in the mouth of everyone who truly loves the game. During that fateful semi-final against Spain, the French midfield was utterly suffocated, gasping for air. They were completely lost, wildly disorganized, and run ragged by a masterclass in possession football from the Spanish side. Up front, Kylian Mbappe was isolated and starving for the ball, forced to watch his teammates chase shadows in the center of the park. It was a tactical disaster, a crying shame that could have been solved by the one man who made a career out of dismantling Spanish-style midfields. Yet the shield of France remained sitting on the bench, completely ignored by a manager who refused to admit he was wrong. As the final minutes ticked away, millions of devastated French fans in the stands and watching at home turned their desperate eyes to the bench. They were searching for the number 13 jersey. They were praying to see N'Golo Kante warming up, desperately hoping for those relentless, lung-busting runs and those miraculous tactical interceptions that had made him a living legend. It was a collective plea from an entire nation begging for their patron saint to step onto the grass and perform one more miracle to save them from humiliation. But the call never came, and the desperate prayers of the fans were met with nothing but cold, empty silence from the coaching staff. Even the legendary French icon Thierry Henry could not contain his immense fury after the match. He spoke for all of us when he bitterly stated, "You cannot let a defensive machine, a leader, and a champion like Kante just sit and watch his teammates play at a World Cup. France lacked the heart that he always brings." It was a rare, blistering critique from one of the greatest to ever wear the blue shirt, exposing the gaping wound at the center of the team. Henry saw the truth that Didier Deschamps refused to acknowledge. By benching their saint, France had willingly ripped out their own beating heart on the world stage. But Didier Deschamps' tactical chalkboard remained entirely frozen, locked in a state of stubborn denial. He chose to sink with his pride rather than throw a lifeline to the man who had rescued him so many times in the past. And so, N'Golo Kante remained completely motionless on the bench, a silent observer to a tragedy he was forbidden to prevent. This was the ultimate indictment of a manager's ego overriding the common good. To watch a player of Kante's legendary status being treated with such cold indifference in his final hour of international duty is a sight that should make any true football fan's skin crawl with a deep sense of injustice. When the 90-minute nightmare finally ended, the young, overwhelmed French players collapsed and wept on the grass of Dallas Stadium. But what about Kante? He simply stood up in his training bib, quietly adjusted his gear, and walked slowly down the tunnel. There were no cameras flashing to capture his final moments, no grand, emotional round of applause from the fans who adored him, and absolutely no heroic last stand on the pitch. He slipped away into the shadows of the stadium, abandoned by the very system he had spent a decade lifting on his shoulders. It was a heartbreakingly quiet exit for a saint who deserved a warrior's farewell. At 35 years of age, this marked the bitter, quiet final chapter of N'Golo Kante's legendary international career. He had served his beloved country until the very last second, displaying the exact same quiet, fiercely loyal dignity that has defined his entire life. Even when subjected to the ultimate disrespect by his manager on the world's biggest stage, he did not utter a single word of complaint or leak a single frustrated comment to the press. He remained a class act, a silent guardian who bore the weight of this massive injustice with a grace that his coach could only dream of possessing. He was, and always will be, the true heart of France. France will undoubtedly spend the next several years endlessly analyzing their tactical failures and structural collapses against Spain. But for you and me, and the rest of the football world, the real tragedy of this tournament will never be found on a tactical chalkboard. It will always be remembered in the sad, vacant, and silent eyes of N'Golo Kante, sitting powerless on that bench. That was the day France did not just lose a football match. It was the day they willingly left their beating heart out in the freezing cold. They abandoned their patron saint when they needed his protection the most. And that is a sin French football will never truly wash away. Thank you for listening to this heartbreaking story. Before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you agree that Didier Deschamps made the most arrogant, unforgivable mistake of his entire coaching career by freezing out N'Golo Kante when France needed him most? Did he truly betray the patron saint of French football? Let me know your thoughts on this massive injustice, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so we can keep uncovering these stories together. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and we will talk in the very next episode. Peace out.